So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a wonderful conclave which is going on infrastructure, where we were talking about the present, past, and now we are heading towards the conversation on future, the future of India's infrastructure. And suddenly we had seen in last 2-3 years that sudden climate issues propping up. We have seen some floods in Uttarakhand, directly damaging many of the infrastructure projects there, dams there, highways which were being built. Now there was a debate going on in the policy sector that whether we should factor in the climate change and certain changes which are coming up in the climate and try to recalibrate our thought process on how to calculate the cost of these projects and the risk which they face. With us, we have some of the best minds working in this segment. I'm starting with Neha. Neha is working very closely on the climate bond side. She's South Asia lead of climate bonds. Ms. Banerjee is from CDRI globally. She's looking at many of the disasters happening and how the infrastructure side, the risks exist. Jagjit Sareen, he had a distinguished career with World Bank, working with the climate side. Later on, Government of India pushed him and invited him back to India, and he was in the leadership team of ISA. And now he is part of Dalberg's global team dealing with the climate and climate-related issues. Jagjit, if I could start with you, there is a lot of debate going on because in the past we never calculated the climate risk. And suddenly, we are seeing that infrastructure projects have been hit by the climate changes and, the catastrophes which we have seen in Uttarakhand and other parts of the country. What is your estimate? Are we able to calculate? Is there models available, or is it feasible to retrospectively try to fit those risks into the things, or we should look at on a more prospective way?
Thanks, Anilesh, first of all to you and to India Today for hosting this very timely and important discussion. Let's look at this issue you have raised from both macro and micro level. Macro, I mean at a country level, and micro at an asset level. What is the story of climate physical risks, both acute and chronic, which happen with intensity one time, or things which are happening slowly but steadily and in the negative direction, by which I mean temperatures and sea rise and all the rest. And with acute, you would say whether it's floods, storms, and landslides and others. I'm going to quote a number from the study of CDRI, and she's sitting next to me, leading that effort. Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, an India-led multilateral initiative, did a fantastic study looking at the annual average losses to infrastructure in their member countries, India being one. And for the current infrastructure stock, their estimate is that climate risks leading to disasters or increased frequency of disaster would lead to $30 billion annual losses. 30. Oh, wow. So that's just number which I think we should all think about. India is a growth story. India is an infrastructure build-up story. Anywhere you go, we are building new infrastructure. This, I'm talking about the current stock. Then you look at how the financial sector is looking at the issue of physical climate risk. And here again, as in financial sector of India, regulator is setting the tone. That's how the financial sector is responding. And Reserve Bank of India in the last 3-4 years, especially during India's G20 presidency, pushed the needle on disclosures from the regulated entities, both banks and NBFCs, in disclosing the physical climate risk or climate risk in aggregate, both transition and physical climate risk on their portfolios. Currently, there is a disclosure draft out for public consultation, and they have received thousands of comments and feedback to improve that. Essentially, what RBI is asking all the banks is to conduct a climate risk test, which ECB has asked European banks. They did. Some point, Americans were also working in that direction. They have withdrawn. But globally, through Basel and other regulators, there is a push to banks to look at their portfolio from physical climate risk. Indian banks have done their own pilot stress testing of climate risk. And it's not a pleasant story. I don't want to scare people who are investing in infrastructure, but look at it this way. You are better off knowing the risk now rather than leaving it to God. And once you know the risk, you can start hardening the asset, thereby reducing the vulnerability of your asset, so that the hit to the asset by any disaster, whether climate-induced or otherwise, earthquakes, is limited or managed. Disruptions are low. Your business continuity remains intact. So you could pay back the debt service, ratios remain intact, your valuations don't go down, your stock prices remain fine. And then you can look at the insurance industry to also mitigate. So essentially what I'm saying is, to your question, coming back to it, at an aggregate level, things are moving in the right direction. Now, financial sector is internalizing it. What's going to happen next is all the banks are going to say, if you're coming for a loan for infra, tell me what's the climate risk assessment. And that's where I think we need to move faster. Again, there is launch of Mission Mosam and various other parts of Government of India, whether Ministry of Earth Sciences, EST, and others, are building the capability of Indian state to come out with good assessment of climate risk to infrastructure. And various methodologies are coming in, and that's where there is work in progress. The issue comes from a financer, and then I'll stop, is at an asset level where you're funding, if you're funding a port, airport, are assessments of the multi-hazard climate risk to a port, to an airport, is still a bit limited. We are looking at ranges, and financiers don't like ranges. They want precision so that they can provision for it, they can plan for it. So at a macro level, I think we are getting our act together. At a micro level asset, we have a long way to go. Thank you.
So you have scared us on multiple areas. One, we don't have technology to understand it properly right now. Secondly, we don't have the capacity right now to understand the risk mitigation methodologies. Suddenly, we don't have that much of money, right?
Well, I think you're putting a bit of India Today spin on it, what I said. But what I'm saying is, I think now there is a realization that climate physical risk to our infrastructure is real. We are getting our act together to get a handle on assessment of the risk. I think we are a little far away from reducing our vulnerability or hardening our asset. I think we are a little further far away from having the financial instruments to deal with it. But it's a work in progress.
So, Ranjini, if you can, help us, he has scared us enough. You take us a little bit, on a 35,000 feet, especially, CDRI is working with multiple countries, is our multilateral. Help us in understanding how real is the fear psychosis which Jagjit is trying to, sell us to us.
No, thank you very much. First of all, thank you to India Today for inviting CDRI in this important conclave. As Jagjit rightly said, it's a very timely discussion. Now, physical climate risk is real, no doubt about it. Jagjit talked about the risk that India has in terms of annual average loss. Because we're a multilateral, let me also paint the global picture. So globally, if you see, the amount is almost like 763 billion USD. That's the global average annual loss.
How much?
763 billion USD.
No, this is scary.
Yeah? And this is scary. And then, let me add another layer. This is the data at the asset level. This does not look into the losses that is incurred due to disruption of services. So power plant gets damaged. There is a loss, which is asset level loss. And because of damage to the power plant, there is lack of power supply for several years, several months, several days, sometimes more than 1.5 years. And then there is a huge impact on the lives and livelihoods of people. And that is not yet assessed. That is something we are trying to do. And as Jagjit said, this is a model we have, CDRI has developed, which is known as GIRI. It was launched in 2023. It actually looks at the impact of 7 hazards across 8 critical infrastructure sector. And it's a probabilistic risk modeling, so it also looks at the future risks, also look at the impact of climate change. And what it helps is, at the national level, it provides the government an average annual loss figure. So basically the risk information converted to a financial matrix, which will help the policymakers and all other relevant stakeholders to understand the amount of risk embedded in the infrastructure sector. Having said that, this is a global tool. That's why we have given national. It's not very, if you really take this figure to the country level, there may be a little variation because it is based on all the open data sources that that exist as on date. But we are kind of fine-tuning this, and we are working closely with several countries now on how to kind of downscale and localize this tool. So this is a tool which is good enough to give you some kind of an understanding on the loss. And loss is not about, okay, there is a loss will happen due to flood. It also gives you a figure, number one. Number two, but there is an opportunity. I'm very hopeful in the sense the risk also gives you an opportunity because 50% of the infrastructure across the globe is yet to be built. And that gives us an opportunity that if we are able to embed resilience at this stage, then probably the infrastructure that will come up in future will be much more resilient. They will be, they will also not much more resilient to climate risk. They will help us to accelerate social and economic development and also help us achieve our SDGs. Now, because you wanted to understand that what we are doing, let me just cite 3 examples what we are doing. So GIRI is one data platform that is publicly available. Very rarely you find this kind of data available in the public domain. So that's something we have developed. Countries have been using it. And there is a huge interest amongst many countries to downscale it using their own local level data. Second, what we are doing is also, we are working very closely with the Ministry of Finance, Department of Economic Affairs, and we are looking into the national infrastructure pipeline. We are looking at 2 specific infrastructure sector and helping to come up with a cost-benefit analysis tool. This tool will actually help government to understand that what is the dividend the government will get by investing on resilience. The tool, along with the tool, there will be also guidance to make necessary modifications in the contractual agreements and also for the private bidders. And there will be also a set of recommendations for the policymakers on resilience planning. So that is a piece of work we have been doing. Very shortly, the study will be released and it will be available in public domain. The second, what we are doing is also helping country to build their fiscal resilience. So we are doing a very assessment. Currently in India, we are working with 4 states. It's Uttarakhand, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, and Odisha. We are helping government to look at how much losses have incurred in the past disaster events, also helping them through catastrophic modeling to understand how much can occur in the future, particularly considering some outlier events that may hit the state. And based on that assessment, they are helping them to kind of come up with their disaster risk financing frameworks. So this helps them to understand, okay, how much has already lost, how much of revenue lost, how much they may lose in future, and so that based on that information, they can come up with their risk assessment, risk management framework. Yeah. And lastly, we have also launched a playbook for financial institutions. It's a guidebook. We have done that with support from Rockefeller Foundation and again technical support from Dalberg. This playbook is a step-by-step guidance to the financial institutions on how to do physical and climate risk assessment, and also kind of guidance on how to use the risk information to make credit and capital decisions, allocation decisions.
So we'll come back to this,
yeah,
but I wanted to, bring Neha into the conversation.
I know, yeah, but if you give me half a minute to touch upon my last point, because this playbook is important, this will also help in capacity building of the financial institutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Neha. These 2 intellectuals have given us 2 figures. $30 billion losses at asset side, and she's talking about $760 billion at a global size. 760 is roughly 1/5 of Indian economy. But it's an opportunity for various finance organizations, and you are already working with many of them. Help us, how do you see the scenario? And secondly, how reliable the data at a very local level is, where, the models and playbooks, can be put to use. And do financiers globally, they rely on this data, or what sort of sources do they use to do the analysis?
Thank you so much for the opportunity. So I shall talk about the opportunity, and I shall take the conversation, or try to take the conversation, from risk to resilience, because it is resilience where the opportunity resides. And I would also like to say that India's net zero cannot be attained if we do not focus on resilience. If we are constantly getting into infrastructural damages and constantly pushing the limits of the exchequer in order to, for recovery, where will the money be for mitigation purposes? Third, I wanted to expand the definition of resilience, not expand, actually really reiterate and emphasize the socio-economic part of it. Resilience resides not only in the ability of an asset, but also that of the system, and the socio-economic vulnerability to be reduced. All of these three things are extremely important, are being looked at now increasingly, like Jagjit said, by regulators. But financial regulators look at it more from risk point of view, because they have to understand the systemic risk that sits in the financial system. But everybody else, every other entity needs to see how to reduce and how to finance that reduction. 2 or 3 things. One is, Jagjit mentioned it slightly, but let me elaborate a little bit more on this. He said that if I knew what the risk would be, then I can plan better. And then I really want to use the word that you've been using, and I heard in the last conversation, recalibration. I think this is exactly where recalibration is happening. It is recalibrate how you plan your future. The challenge over here, and I'll come to the data specificity, the challenge over here is that climate risk is a future risk. So it is, you can have some historical data, but it is not a forecast. That is why you develop scenarios, okay? And then it depends upon the time horizon of a particular risk manifesting, and how do you bring that into your business model, into your financial positioning, into your capex plan, et cetera, et cetera. So that level of granular data is not yet available. I think a layer of it is available, like, CDRI is providing that data. If you go down to the district level, if you go down to the state level, there are organizations, by the way, which are layering this data with a lot of other data, like how much migration will happen, like how many job losses will happen in this particular region if a particular infrastructure asset was to actually face the hazard and not come out of it. And those data points can really go into many multiples of the data points that we have. I think technology will play a huge role over here. Technology will be able to give us or unearth these disparate data points into some kind of a structured knowledge that we need. But for that to happen, you would require some mandatory disclosures. These will need to be forward-looking. They cannot only be based on the historical data. The other thing that I wanted to focus was on where the opportunity is. I think resilience is multi-sectoral, right? From health systems to infrastructure to everything. Now, how do you recognize that one measure is a resilient measure? I think that is a building block.
When you talk about opportunity, I want to talk about the taxonomy thing.
Yes, exactly my next sentence.
So, we have already seen that RBI is struggling with the taxonomy for green deposits. Our finance ministry is struggling with taxonomy. Give some light on that.
Yes.
Then, we can come back to Jagjit.
Yeah, you stole my words. That was exactly my sentence. So, since resilience and risks are so context-specific, mitigation has been the front runner in terms of definitions, okay? EU tried, but gave you a broad process-based way of looking at risk. Climate Bonds, which is the organization that I come from, it sets those definitions. And it has recently come out with Climate Bond Resilience Taxonomy across sectors, infrastructure also, and basically it is really coming down to the level of activity and measure and a scientific way of measuring the improvement, okay? Ministry of Finance, which has constituted a taxonomy task force, of which I am a member, we are also looking at adaptation and resilience, but perhaps the focus initially will be focused on one sector, But I think that is the missing link, and once you know the measures, you can even, in fact, let me just give you an example. Financial institutions.
We are running
yes,
short of
just
time.
one example. Just one example. Financial institutions like NABARD. I'm giving you. I mean, it's not infrastructure, but I'm just giving you the resilience stories in agriculture. They more than 3/4 of their activity is resilient activity. If you had the taxonomy, you could tag your portfolio. You could borrow from the market against that portfolio. And that will reduce the due diligence, the ease with which you will actually identify these measures, and same applies to infrastructure sector as well. I think what we need is not only mitigation transition plans, what we need is also resilience transition plans. I think that is still emerging. It has a huge fiscal implication, and we need both public as well as private investment, which I will probably.
Thank you, Neha. Jagjit, I'm coming back to you. We have gone through a round of, infrastructure fear, opportunities, and some of the solutions. So now I'll throw upon another fear, which most climate professionals are facing, is the disturbance which is happening on the western side of the continent. Donald Trump has already withdrawn from COP, right? He's threatening that he may also withdraw from World Bank. Do you think, we are at a tail end of climate story? Are we seeing some disruption happening in the climate story, and we may restart after 4 years, 5 years? What is your sense? Those Western disturbances, how much they are impacting the climate story across the world?
So I think we've been on this road once. It's the second time Trump is coming, and he withdrew before as well. So we have some sense of how far he goes when it comes to climate. So he withdrew the first time as well, and domestic legislation was stalled, things slowed down, but states did their own thing. Given the way United States is structured, states don't stop. Some Republican states will slow down, others will keep moving. In 2 years, you will have the midterm. It would flip a bit, and then things will keep going. So at a federal level, we see a pause. But I think it's if you look at from a nuanced layer and with some historical evidence, it's not that bad. In terms of World Bank and all, just to give you a sense, I worked in the bank, ADB, and a few other climate finance institutions, GCF included. External capital coming from infra, from the multilateral system, is about 1, 2, 3%. So let's say if tomorrow World Bank stops funding India infrastructure, it won't matter. In terms of financing, it matters in terms of knowledge, the financial instruments they bring and all that. But in terms of the quantum, it's like, I'll give you a figure. Rural Electrification Corporation of India, REC, raises money from international markets in yen, hedges in dollar, deploys in Indian rupees, and pays back cheaper than World Bank lending to India or ADB lending to India. So that gives us a sense that it's not about multilateral financing our infrastructure. But where do multilaterals play a role which may get a hit? They normally look at climate issues in much more forward-leaning way than the national institutions typically do. So they push kind of race to the top. Even there, I would say Indian story is quite good. I'm aware at least 30 of Indian banks have gone through first round of climate stress test. They are building their internal capabilities and building the capacity of their credit officers to get their head around what is climate risk, how do you assess it? And I think the opportunity, Anilesh, is turning this risk into financial instruments, structures, how you mitigate, and sell these solutions to the world. Whole developing world is building infrastructure. We can take a leadership role in terms of financial instruments. Maybe we can build a climate stack and sell it to the world. And then every other sector will use the climate stack, which is climate information curated, labeled, which others would overlay with their sectoral information and get to a climate risk score. Then insurance industry will build products on it, financial structures will be built on it, and I think there is a whole multi-billion-dollar industry waiting to happen, which we can even take outside India. So I'm not that worried about Trump. Thanks.
Thank you, thank you. Unfortunately, the time is over. We can get into this conversation for longer hours. Very interesting topics. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us.